Did you know the Hutus and Tutsis are actually the same tribe? Same language, same culture, same land, but a single colonial decision turned neighbors into enemies. This is where the story gets really interesting. The names Hutu, Tutsi, and Tuwa weren't tribal in the way we think today. They were more like social class markers. Hutu basically meant the people of the soil, farmers, cultivators, those who worked the land. Tutsi meant the people of the cattle, herders, cattle owners, often wealthier. Tuwa were a much smaller group, traditionally hunter-gatherers and potters, considered socially lowest. Here's the kicker. These weren't rigid boxes. A Hutu who gained enough cattle could become a Tutsi, and a Tutsi who lost cattle could drop to Hutu. In other words, the words described status and occupation, not bloodline. For centuries in Burundi, people lived side by side. Colonial rulers, first Germans, then especially Belgians, came and twisted this peaceful living. They decided Hutu and Tutsi were different races. Tutsi supposedly taller, thinner, more Caucasian-looking. This was the ugly pseudoscience of the time. Then they froze those identities on ID cards. No more fluidity. If your card said Hutu, you were Hutu for life, and your children too. That's when the words stopped being about cattle or farming and became loaded with ethnic and political power. So yes, Hutu and Tutsi had real meanings originally, but the tragic part is how those meanings were hijacked and hardened into deadly categories. Overnight, flexible identities became rigid and seeds of hatred were sown. The result? Decades of violence in some of Africa's darkest chapters. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you for your support. Very much appreciated. If you are new here and would like to hear more similar stories, smash that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. Done? Knees. Let's meet in the comments where you tell us where you are watching from and what stood out for you after watching this video. That said, let's continue, shall we? Burundi is a country located in East Africa, landlocked between Rwanda, Tanzania, and DR Congo. Before colonization, Burundi was a kingdom ruled by a monarch called the Mwami. The royal court and much of the kingdom's ceremonial life were centered in Gitega, smack in the country's middle. That gave it both symbolic weight and practical reach. The Mwami wasn't just a political ruler, he was viewed as a spiritual figure too, seen as the link between the people, the land, and God. His role tied together governance, ritual, and unity. Burundi was colonized by the Germans sometime in the 1890s to 1916, but didn't develop much. However, when the Belgians took over after WW1, they required quick access to trade routes. The Germans, then Belgians, left the monarchy in place, but weakened it, using it as a puppet to enforce colonial taxes and policies. We really cannot talk about Burundi without ever mentioning Rwanda, as the two are steeped deep in history. But we will try and focus as much as possible on Burundi. Rwanda will have its day. Burundi has the same two main ethnic groups as Rwanda, Hutus, the majority, and Tutsis, the minority but historically more powerful. And, while Rwanda's genocide in 1994 grabbed the world's attention, Burundi has a long, bloody history of its own ethnic violence, whose roots are tangled in colonial manipulation, social engineering, and power struggles. Here's the blunt truth. In pre-colonial Burundi, Hutus and Tutsis weren't originally seen as separate tribes. They shared the same language, Kirundi, culture, and even intermarried. The difference was mostly class and occupation. Tutsis were traditionally cattle herders, wealthier, and seen as the ruling elite. Hutus were mainly farmers. A small minority, the Tuwa, were hunter-gatherers and potters. So the line was blurry. You could become Tutsi by acquiring cattle, or Hutu by losing wealth. The entry of the colonialists froze these fluid identities into rigid ethnic categories. The Belgians leaned heavily on Tutsi elites to rule, considering them naturally superior because of racist European theories that linked lighter skin, taller build, and cattle ownership to supposed nobility. They issued identity cards labeling people as Hutu, Tutsi, or Tuwa, fixing the categories permanently. Suddenly, what had been social classes became ethnic destinies. Under Belgian rule, Tutsis got better access to education, jobs, and political power, while Hutus were excluded. This built resentment and a sense of systematic injustice. Why it reached such deadly extremes? By the time independence came in 1962, society had been primed for mistrust. The Hutu majority felt they had been locked out for decades, while the Tutsi elite feared losing dominance. After independence in 1962, King Mwambutsa IV tried to maintain unity, but the ethnic question, fueled by colonial ID cards and favoritism, exploded. His son, Ntare V, briefly reigned, but he was ousted in the 1972 coup attempt. He returned later and was assassinated. After that, the monarchy was abolished. Burundi became a republic, but without the Mwami, the center that held was gone. That vacuum let military regimes and ethnic politics spiral into violence. There was what many scholars call genocide against Hutus, where the Tutsi-led government, fearing a Hutu uprising, systematically targeted educated Hutus. Tens of thousands were killed. Some estimates go over 100,000. A whole generation of Hutus was wiped out. In 1988, there was another major bloodbath. Thousands more Hutus were killed in the north. Each cycle of massacre hardened mistrust and deepened ethnic divisions. Hope returns. 1993 brought fragile hope to Burundi. For the first time in history, Burundi elected a Hutu president, Melchior Ndadaye. His victory promised change, but the dream lasted barely 3 months. On October 21st, the army stormed the palace, and Ndadaye was captured and killed by bayonet. His death shattered the new democracy and sparked revenge killings. The country exploded. Hutus killed Tutsis in the countryside, and the army, dominated by Tutsis, retaliated with brutal precision. The violence spiraled into civil war. In February 1994, Cyprien Ntaryamira, who was a Hutu, was chosen as a compromise candidate to steady the country after the death of Ndadaye. On the 6th of April 1994, Ntaryamira traveled to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, for a regional summit. He flew back aboard the Rwandan presidential jet alongside Rwanda's president, Juvenal Habyarimana, also Hutu, though with very different politics. As the plane prepared to land in Kigali, it was struck by missiles and crashed, killing everyone on board. The fallout. The shoot-down of that plane is widely considered the spark that lit the Rwandan genocide. Within hours, extremist militias in Rwanda launched a meticulously planned extermination campaign against Tutsis and moderate Hutus, the 1994 link to Rwanda. When the Rwandan genocide erupted, Burundi didn't descend into the same scale of mass exterminations, but it was heavily shaken. Refugee flows crossed borders, militia groups found allies across Rwanda and Burundi, and the violence in one country fed the fire in the other. For Burundi, losing Ntaryamira just weeks after electing him was another brutal shock. He was only 2 months into office. His death added fuel to Burundi's civil war, because Hutu communities saw it as yet another betrayal and loss at the hands of a system stacked against them. 1993 to 2005. Burundi's civil war raged for over a decade, killing an estimated 300,000 people. It only ended after peace agreements and the eventual integration of Hutu rebel groups into politics. So in short, Burundi wasn't a bystander in 1994, it was already burning in its own way. If Rwanda's tragedy was an explosion, Burundi's was a long, grinding fire. The road to peace wasn't smooth, it was painstaking and slow. The first step came with the Arusha Peace and Reconciliation Agreement in 2000, brokered by Tanzania's Julius Nyerere, and later Nelson Mandela after Nyerere's death. It laid out power sharing between Hutus and Tutsis, promising no single group could dominate again. The biggest Hutu rebel movement, CNDD-FDD, agreed to a ceasefire in 2003. Its leader, Pierre Nkurunziza, would later become president. Other groups followed, though a small faction, the FNL, kept fighting until 2008. A new constitution adopted in 2005 cemented ethnic quotas. For example, the army and the police must each be 50% Hutu and 50% Tutsi. B. Parliament seats are reserved at 60% Hutu, 40% Tutsi, with small slots for the Tuwa, the indigenous minority. This was designed to stop one group from monopolizing power again. The democratic election of Pierre Nkurunziza in 2005 marked a transition from warlordism to politics, some form of democracy. Wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Former fighters were absorbed into the military and government structures, reducing the risk of rogue militias. Eventually, peace came. Rebel groups laid down arms, and power sharing between Hutus and Tutsis became the fragile foundation of governance. Burundi is not fully healed, but it survived the fire. Today, its official capital lies in Gitega, a symbol of returning to cultural roots. But the ghosts of Bujumbura and the countryside still whisper reminders of how thin the line is between peace and destruction. Burundi's story is not just one of violence, it is one of survival, a nation scarred, but still standing. Beauty from ashes.